morning and welcome to Rising. We are so happy to see you here this morning. Of course, virtually, we can't really see you beyond the TV screens, can we, Briahna?
Maybe for a fee. We're going to start doing house calls.
That'd be fun. But only our top supporters. You have Patreon,
Yeah,
you could give that reward on bad faith.
A special tier, a very top tier Patreon benefit.
At the magazine I write for Reason, where we are supported by donors, there is some kind of reward if you give during the annual giving week or something that you can have lunch with me if you want.
I feel like, you know how sometimes people send candygrams in an aggressive way? Like you send them to your enemies to be disturbed at your door.
Oh, that's a new idea.
The people who paid for that privilege would be inflicting us on others, I'm pretty sure.
Wonderful. Well, let's get to the news.
All right. Well, a majority of Americans find the two leading candidates for president are just too darn old to serve another term. Per Ipsos ABC News polling, 59% of the country agrees that both former President Trump and President Biden are too old to serve as president for another 4 years. And the percentage of Americans who feel like their side is losing rather than winning is up 15 points since 2020 to almost 75%. A New Morning Consult survey finds Trump and Biden practically neck and neck in a general election matchup, with Trump leading by a single point. Meanwhile, a new NBC News survey finds that voters are rating former President Trump's first term as having gone better than expected, and Biden's has gone worse than expected. This effect intensifies amongst independents. 52% of them say Biden's first term has gone worse than they anticipated. Just 18% say the same of Trump's. Plus, a new Financial Times polling finds about 42% of voters believe Trump would be the best steward for the United States economy going forward, while 31% choose Biden.
Meanwhile, Trump is walloping Nikki Haley in the South Carolina primary by a lead of 35 points per a new CBS News poll. South Carolina primary voters will cast their ballots on February 24th. So it's a very interesting result there that people saying that Trump's first term went better than expected. But it's actually not surprising if you think about it, because the media denunciation of Trump was at a level like, if you elect this man, he will kill us all.
End of democracy, people in gulags, there will be camps.
For immigrants, for minorities, et cetera. And we were, theatrically, from his performance and the things he says are well outside the norm for just American political discourse, or were at the time. Now it's becoming increasingly normal. That part of it was true. But the governance was pretty standard Republican governance, frankly. Yeah. And, with some breaking of the consensus on trade and some, again, articulated differences on foreign policy. They were not maybe dramatically as different, actually, as people hoped they were getting when they voted for him. But it was marked more by continuity than anything else. And so but because the expectations were so low, it doesn't surprise me at all that people said that.
Yeah, Donald Trump here is benefiting from the soft bigotry of low expectations. And hey, I don't blame him for exploiting it, especially since the Democrats and liberal media have been so slow to catch up on changing a narrative from Trump is worse and the world's going to fall apart, which we know, frankly, didn't happen. Now, obviously, anything's possible in the future. Yeah. He can ratchet things up. But I think what was really demonstrated was how the core establishment workings of government remain status quo the same regardless of who's in power.
Sadly.
For better or for worse,
Sadly.
right? And this is why we sit here on this show and we critique establishment politics, and we're excited about the prospect of newcomers, whether it's an RFK Jr. or a Marianne Williamson or a Cornel West or whomever comes around the pike, or the Libertarian candidate. But the problem is the machine is so good at taking even insurgent candidates and turning them into the same old thing. So many progressives have been frustrated by Bernie Sanders, even though he remains the best of a bad bunch. Ultimately, sheep herding people back into the Democratic Party. And that's why there's so much of an appetite, I think, for people who genuinely are running not as Democrats, but fully as outsiders.
Barack Obama, a constitutional law scholar running for president, on a critique of what he argued and what I frankly agreed with were the unconstitutional aspects of the war on terror and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. He seemed uniquely well positioned, that he understood those arguments, and then it was continuity and then some. It was a ratcheting up in many respects.
We tortured some folks, right? So I mentioned that the liberal media was slow to catch up on this narrative that clearly isn't working. Interestingly, Jon Stewart is back on the air as of last night, and I was pleased, it's late, but pleased to see that he has adopted kind of this framing and said, basically, this is what he said: the stakes of this election don't make Donald Trump's opponent less subject to scrutiny. It actually makes him more subject to scrutiny. If the barbarians are at the gate, you want Conan standing at the ramparts, not the chocolate chip cookie guy. Finally, you're having mainstream liberal commentators saying, well, if the argument is Trump is really, really bad, that's an argument for having someone better than Biden and replacing him as soon as possible, not saying cover your ears and cover your eyes and ignore the disaster that's coming down the pike.
And ignore this polling that shows, again, so much dissatisfaction with both candidates for a variety of reasons, but Trump perfectly positioned to win ultimately, unless there's some fundamental change between now and election day, which could happen, but it could also happen to his benefit, right? There's some shakeup. We don't know that will actually damage Trump. In other primary news, progressive Democrat from Missouri, Cori Bush, is actually down 22 points against her primary challenger, Wesley Bell, in a new survey from GOP polling firm Remington Research Group. Do you know anything about this race?
Not really. I did see a little bit of coverage about her polls being low. I understand that the issue of Israel and Gaza and funding Israel is a key driver in that particular race. Cori Bush being someone who's been critical of the siege on Gaza, and her opponent presumably not.
Yeah.
And, this has been an issue for progressives across the board. AIPAC pledged, I think, $100,000 to defeat pro-Palestine candidates, however you want to characterize it, as very shortly after October 7th. This has been something that's been going on for years, with Hakeem Jeffries being part of various PACs that have been very hostile to insurgent Democrats. There has been a detente of sorts that's emerged over the course of the last year or so, where, for example, there was a decision for Hakeem Jeffries not to support a challenger to Ilhan Omar. Who knows how that got brokered? But historically, AIPAC has put big money up against people like Summer Lee, progressives like Nita Turner, and all of the squad members across the board, precisely because long before October 7th, they've been advocates for Palestinian sovereignty and basic human rights protections.
We should comment before we go on this Nikki Haley situation in South Carolina. So Trump well positioned to decisively defeat her there in that primary. Now, it's worth noting, because South Carolina is, of course, Nikki Haley's state. That's where she was the governor. The state has, I think, since she was governor, moved further to the right, or among the part of it that is right-leaning, further in a Trump direction. So maybe that's not so surprising a result. But, in another era, in another cycle, we might be commenting on how this is a good opportunity for this candidate, given she's so well known and not, I think, uniquely reviled or anything in that state, but it's not going to matter at all, which shows that this is really not this. This is over for her. Barring some extraordinary legal kind of consequence for Donald Trump that prevents him from running, which cannot be ruled out, but she is not going to prevail over him in any sort of election process.
That's a tough road for her. South Carolina, where campaigns go to die. I say that as a former Bernie 2020 press secretary, and I should just correct myself. It was, I think I said 100,000. I meant $100 million war chest pledged against progressives. So we'll definitely
100,000 is not that much.
That's not enough.
That's survivable.
That's chump change, exactly. All right, stick with us. We have more Rising for you coming up next.